The entirety of this episode is very much one of the archetype of the sacred prostitute. And for that reason, I don't want to say too much up front. I really want you to experience the invitation and see what it awakens within you, which, without wanting to give a spoiler, I will say it has so much healing power. So I will say no more, and I will allow you to experience her invitation for yourself. Let's dive in. Welcome to September's All the Everything. And it is my first All the Everything back from the August break. And this is a kind of pre-opening of the temple of the Priestess that I will be opening with Rose Quest. And I hadn't actually anticipated to be doing this show today, but the timing turns out to be perfect because I am just about to open the temple doors to Rose Quest. And the reason I am talking about the Sacred Priestess in this particular episode is that will be the archetype that we're journeying with as we enter the portal of the rose. So that's the reason for, and again, this is an archetype very dear to my heart. So it's kind of been one that has been calling me to speak about her for some time, but this has provided the real reason to do so. And there's probably been some personal resistance to this as I come up against the, I guess, collective shadow around this particular archetype. And I've had some quite funny but challenging examples of that actually show up today as I was moving towards recording this. The first one began this morning when I realised I was going to record this topic. I decided to wear this. If you're watching on video, I've got a kind of gold, slightly sort of diaphanous thing on. And where I normally do wear dresses and kind of adorn myself, I wouldn't normally wear something quite like this in the daytime. And my cleaners arrived and one of them said to me, "Oh, you look lovely. Are you doing anything special today?" And I really noticed there was this sense in me of like, oh, it doesn't feel appropriate to share the exact reason. So I didn't lie. I said I'm recording a video and I'm kind of dressing according to the theme. I just didn't say the theme. So that was my first meeting with that collective shadow this morning. And I'm sharing all this because you'll see as we start to journey with the archetype, the way that we will get to meet that our own personal wounding resistance to this archetype, but will also come right up against the way that this is something absolutely held in the collective too. The next thing that happened is I was creating the Facebook event for this. And I did something a bit different to what I normally do. And I intended to create a public event, but only invite people who are in the Facebook group. And I don't know what I did, but I think it looked to me that I've just sent an invite out to all kinds of people who I really wouldn't have wanted to invite into the temple of the Sacred Prostitute. And I was just like, my goodness, the irony of all of the invitations I could send out. It's this one that's gone to my ex-boss, my ex-boyfriend, my stepfather, people who, for all kinds of reasons, aren't probably the ones that I would have invited to this. And yet it appears I may have done that. So this has been a really interesting journey just to get to this point. That's just today, not to mention the kind of the ways this has shown up over the months and years before. Anyway, we are now, and then I've had all sorts of technical issues as well, which I won't go into, but we are now going to enter the temple of the Sacred Prostitute. And again, I'd be mindful, and my invitation to you personally is to recognize the way that the resistance is showing up for you as we journey with her. So we're going to begin with a story. As you probably know, I often weave story and folktale and myths into these episodes. They're, for me, one of the most powerful portals into working with deities and archetypes and energies that are beyond our understanding of what's available in this seemingly mundane mainstream world. So often us entering via this portal of story is something that takes us out of that ordinary world, out of what we think is possible. And this particular story is from the book, The Sacred Prostitute, by Nancy Qualls-Corbett. I'm going to show it up for those of you watching on video. And this is, I'm only probably going to have one book as recommended reading for the Rose Quest, and it's going to be this one. So this is the one I'm going to be reading from in a moment. I would invite you, if you're listening and you're in a place where you can kind of really allow yourself to journey inwards, close your eyes and be sort of taken by the story, do that. Of course, if you're driving or something like that, just be mindful. If you're someone like me that can kind of easily enter altered states of consciousness, perhaps it might be better to come back, or I'll let you be the judge of what is right for you. I would also suggest, as ever, I really like to do these shows as something far more than a podcast episode. For me, they're a kind of opportunity for us to really journey together, work together, make conscious what that particular story archetype is illuminating for you. So if you've got something to write on, capture notes on, I wouldn't do that constantly. Certainly when I'm telling you the story, put that down, but there will be particular questions I'm going to ask where it would be really powerful for you to be able to capture what's come up. So I will let you know when you need to start writing, but if you want to gather your writing implements now, that would be a good thing to do. Okay. Imagine, if you will, traveling to a foreign land, a strange land where only a few have journeyed. There we come upon the ruins of an ancient civilization, now forgotten. Outlines of half-buried stones suggest the foundation of a once majestic temple. Portions of huge broken marble columns lay scattered about as if some giant force had destroyed them. Wandering among these ruins, imagine the life once lived here. Our mind's eye can see the temple as it once must have been, glistening in the sunlight, a rectangular structure, spacious, with intricately carved pediments, its roof supported by the massive fluted columns. Beams of light from all angles penetrate the walls. Through the open doors, we can peer into the inner sanctuary. A figure moves gracefully before the altar, illuminating it by bringing fire to the clay oil lamps all around. Behold the priestess of the temple of Venus, the goddess of love. She is the sacred prostitute. She is a mystery concealed by veils. We see her only dimly, yet in the flickering light we discern her shapely feminine outline. A breeze lifts her veils to reveal her long black tresses. Silver bracelets adorn her arms and ankles. Miniature crescents hang from her earlobes, and lapis lazuli beads encircle her neck. Her perfume, with its musk-like aroma, creates an aura which stimulates and enriches physical desire. As the sacred prostitute moves through the open temple doors, She begins to dance to the music of the flute, tambourine, and cymbals. Her gestures, her facial expressions, and the movement of her supple body all speak to the welcoming of passion. There is no false modesty regarding her body. And as she dances, the contours of her feminine form are revealed under an almost transparent saffron robe. Her movements are graceful, as she is well aware of her beauty. She is full of love, and as she dances, her passion grows. In her ecstasy, she forgets all restraint and gives herself to the deity and to the stranger. 1,000 pens of gold and inks scented with musk are needed to describe the feminine appeal, beauty, and sensuality of this vision as she quickly passes through our mind's eye back into the dark recesses of the temple. Imagine the sacred prostitute greeting the stranger, a world-weary man who has come to the temple to worship the goddess of love. No words are spoken. Her outstretched arms and the soft, warm expression of her radiant eyes and face say what needs to be said. In her private chambers, the sacred love room of the temple, filled with the fragrance of herbs and flowers, she bathes the stranger. Offering him balm, she tells him amusing stories of her training, how the temple priests and other ritual priestesses taught her the art of lovemaking. Keep your fingers close to your knees and your eyes lowered. When you look sideways, try to press your chin into your shoulder, she tells him, playfully mocking them. She prepares a tray of fresh dates, nuts, and fruit, which she lays before him, along with bread dipped in honey. The sacred prostitute and the stranger drink sweet wine from a single silver cup. She came to the temple, she tells him, in order to fulfill the law of the land, which every maiden must do. With reverence, she speaks of her devotion to the goddess as she approaches the small marble image of Venus. In the near darkness, alone in her rapture, she performs the ritual of lighting the perfumed oil lamp, gently swaying and chanting softly in prayer of thanksgiving to the goddess. The stranger watches quietly and thinks to himself, how different is she from me? How strangely different. She is afraid of me and my male difference. She is getting herself naked and clear of her fear. How sensitive and softly alive she is, with a life so different from mine. How beautiful, with a strange, soft courage of life. How terrible to fail her or to trespass on her. As the sacred prostitute turns back to the stranger, she removes her saffron robe and gestures to him to stand before the image of Venus. He moves awkwardly at first, but deep within the stirring of his manhood gives impetus to strong strides. He kneels in honor before the goddess of passion and love and offers a prayer of supplication that she will receive his offering. The sacred prostitute leads the stranger to the couch prepared with white linens and aromatic myrtle leaves. She has rubbed sweet-smelling white thyme on her thighs. Her faint smile and glistening eyes tell the stranger that she is full of desire for him. The gentle touch of her embrace sparks a fiery response. He feels the quickening of his body. He is keenly aware of the passion within this votary to the goddess of love and fertility, and is fulfilled. The woman and the stranger know that the consummation of the love act is consecrated by the deity through which they are renewed. The ritual itself, due to the presence of the divine, is transforming. The sacred prostitute, no longer a maiden, is initiated into the fullness of womanhood, the beauty of her body and her sexuality. Her true feminine nature is awakened to life. The divine element of love resides in her. The stranger too is transformed. The qualities of the receptive feminine nature, so opposite from his own, are embedded deep within his soul. The image of the sacred prostitute is viable within him. He is fully aware of the deep emotions within the sanctuary of his heart. He makes no specific claims on the woman herself, but carries her image, the personification of love and sexual joy, into the world His experiences of the mysteries of sex and religion open the door to the potential of ongoing life. It accompanies the regeneration of the soul. So, I'd like you to take a moment just to close your eyes if you're able to do so, and just feel what's there. Feel what the Sacred Prostitute and the Stranger have evoked within you. Just allow those feelings, images, sensations, memories, thoughts, to allow them to arise. And if you'd like to capture those in a few words, maybe a drawing, whatever way you want to capture ever arose for you, do so now. And then we're going to ask you some particular questions. But first, before you do that, just capture everything that arose without those prompts. Okay. Again, with each of these questions, just take a moment to close your eyes and see where the question takes you. See what arises. Allow yourself to place your awareness on your body, on your emotions, on your thoughts, and whatever's there is perfect. There is no right way to answer any of these questions. The first one is, what does her temple evoke for you? So we were invited into this sacred space, this temple that is devoted to union, that union of the sexual and the spiritual. What does that evoke for you? The next question is, we journeyed to meet the Sacred Prostitute herself. She was brought so vividly to life. Whether you're someone who's able to see something in your mind's eye, or perhaps you're someone who feels it or just knows it, my sense is you had an experience of the Sacred Prostitute yourself. What does she evoke in you? What did you notice? What did you feel? And again, with each of these questions, just allow yourself to see what's there. There is no right way of answering this other than the right way for you. The next question is, what did the stranger, so the man that came to the temple, what did he evoke within you? The man who came to unite with the Sacred Prostitute. What do you feel? What do you think? What do you see about him? And then lastly, we were invited into a sense, it wasn't explicitly described, but we were certainly given a sense of their union, their sexual spiritual union. What did that evoke in you? What did that symbolize to you? What did you notice? Wonderful. Okay. So now I invite you to look back at what you've captured there, everything that arose for you that you've written down in words or perhaps in images. What do you notice? Where do you see those roles or themes showing up in your own life, in your longings, in your fears maybe, or maybe in your fantasies or dreams? Just look back over what you've written and notice, where is this already showing up? And again, when I say showing up, I really do mean in any way. It could absolutely be in your fantasies or your dreams, or in either a literal or metaphorical nature in your relationships. Or you might have noticed there's a synchronicity where some of those themes are showing up in perhaps the books you've been reading or the films you've been watching. So just capture that too. Wonderful. So my sense is, and I shared a bit about this at the beginning, in experiencing the sacred prostitute and the union with the stranger, you have already got a sense that there's repression and fear and resistance and exploitation that comes as soon as we start to make contact with these energies. They come together because that's how they are held in our collective and in our own psyches, which of course, what is most universal is most personal, and vice versa. So perhaps you've already got a sense of that. I will share some of the ways this can show up. But I would love you to start to inquire upon this yourself, because my sense is, and I could be wrong, but what you've written above is probably beautiful. You probably captured some really potent healing words and symbols around love and this sense of celebration of the body and sensuality. I suspect that's the case, may not be, but I suspect for most people there's going to be some real beauty captured there. But of course, this is not something that we are being conscious of and living into in our lives for very good reason. And so this is, again, becoming more conscious of why that is, allows us to start to more consciously journey with this archetype or these archetypes, if, again, we choose to do so. This certainly isn't an archetype that everyone is going to be called to, certainly not to really devote themselves to. So fully understand that. But even if you're here and simply out of a little bit of curiosity are here listening or watching this episode, there's clearly something in it that's speaking to you, even if you don't choose to go deeper afterwards. So again, the more conscious you can be of what comes up in resistance, the more that you are able to move into expressing and embodying the beauty of these archetypes. So the main ways this shows up in, again, out there in the collective, also in here for all of us, is we will have this sense that sexuality, sensuality, particularly female, is wrong and impure, dirty, dangerous, and needs to be hidden, needs to be repressed. Again, I shared some examples of how I was experiencing that just in the planning to talk about the sacred prostitute this morning. So there is going to be, and you've probably heard me talk about this before, when we talk about shadow, there tends to be this pole of extremes, different ways that can show up. So this is the repressed end, where we're saying, no, we can't possibly hold the notion there could be something beautiful and healing about that aspect of the feminine, and so there is a repression of it. So notice if that's shown up for you. And again, this can be true whether you are a man or a woman listening to this, whether it's you are being called personally to the embodiment of the sacred prostitute, or you're being called to one way or another make contact with her in the way that the stranger did. Notice how these ideas of this is, again, so taboo, so dark, so edgy, so impure, that actually it's too dangerous to go here. And go gently with all of these things. There's very, very good reason that we might feel this way. And this is also where the personal wounding will come into this. It may well be that you've had experiences that have you feel that way too, as well as the collective shadow. There could well be deep wounding that you have that makes that repression feel safer. Certainly has been the case for me. And then at the other end of that shadow pole, there can be a kind of exploitation, an objectification, and again, a kind of stripping away of the sacred, where the kind of more, like even the word prostitute is seen in itself as being this kind of transactional archetype. And of course there is this profane version of this archetype which is absolutely about that. There is a transactional act, usually involving money, but not always. Sometimes it can be used for forms of other gain, control and power and safety. And it is a very, again, a transactional act, and it has no spiritual meaning, no sacred meaning. And this is, again, when we're talking about that feminine, female sexuality and sensuality, is so interesting in our culture, where we will be often in relationship to it in one of those two ways, either this repression or this objectification, stripping it of anything sacred, where it is really a kind of what can we take from it. And that can be whether we are the man or the woman, whether we're embodying the feminine or the masculine. There is that way that we can experience and project upon this archetype. And these are going to show up in both very obvious extreme ways, but certainly I'd say for those of us who are, somewhere along our journey of individuation, these are likely to be more subtle. They're likely to be like hidden in the way that we show up in relationships, hidden in the way that we show up in our expression, rather than necessarily be quite as sort of fixed and binary in the way that I've just spoken about them. And then what's been really fascinating for me as I prepare to open the temple doors to RoseQuest, part of what I'm intending to do is create astrological readings that are for each of the women joining me, that speak to their own path with the temple priestess. So this will be illuminating aspects about their chart that perhaps are calling them to that archetype, but also, and the gifts that come with that, they are, again, are very much seen in their chart, but then also the work they are going to need to do to make conscious the places they are going to be at one or other of that shadow pole. And as I've just started to begin, before I'd even had a chance to open the doors, there was a kind of very clear, I want in on this. So I've actually begun working on those readings. And I'll just give you an example. I won't name whose chart this is from, but as an example, and this again can be seen really clearly in our astrological charts, and the best readings we can see. We actually is not news to us. It's helpful to have it very clearly distilled, but the most energetically precise readings will only mirror to us what we already know, or at least have a sense of. And so this is an example where this particular placement in someone's chart meant that they have a high degree of like magnetism. They're going to be someone who people are drawn to. And so there can be this kind of misuse of their beauty and sensuality, again, at that kind of exploitation end of the pole, where it can be used as a way of gaining power. So it's not saying they are literally being the prostitute, obviously, or even necessarily using sex itself as a means of manipulation. Is much more subtle than that. It's the way that they use their looks and their magnetism. And again, for each woman journeying with this archetype, or with me in Rose Quest, of journeying with the archetype as they enter the portal of the rose, there will be specific ways, and often more than one, that they will be in that one end or other, but often both, of that shadow pole. And so, again, you may already have a sense of it, but there's something, so powerful where we really recognize that, yes, we can kind of, if we want, sort of go to work saying our culture, those out there are wrong. They should be able to see the sacred nature of these things. But it rarely works, and often means a bypassing of what's really going on within us. So my recommendation would be to start with what you know is showing up for you personally. So then I'd like to come back again to what I was saying earlier, where these aren't archetypes that necessarily are for everyone to work with. But I'm again going to respect the fact that if you are here listening or watching this, you have some degree of calling to her. It doesn't necessarily mean it's time for you to go deeper right now, but again, really honor what's calling you. Honor the longings, the sense of curiosity that's called you here. And I will say that there's a real kind of journey of initiations with the different archetypes before we are ready for this one. Looking at it in a Jungian sense, and again, the book that I mentioned at the beginning speaks about this really well. For a man, for example, it could be said that he's going to need to meet his anima in the archetypes, and again, he's going to meet this in his projections on actual women, but also it could be again in his dreams, fantasies. All these different ways that we can make these things conscious. He's going to need to journey with the archetypes of Eve and Helen of Troy and the Virgin Mary before he's ready to really meet Sophia, the goddess, in the form of this embodiment of the sacred prostitute. To try to skip that means that work beforehand will have been skipped, will have been bypassed. And so what is held there will be projected upon this notion of the sacred prostitute. And again, for the woman, the way I've described it on the Rose Quest page is there is such a level of, I guess, individuation, we might call it, union, sovereignty, that a woman really needs to have journeyed with first. I've used the language of, because these are the archetypes I've often worked with, she will have needed to already journeyed and embodied the wise woman, the wild woman, the queen and the lover, to have this real sense of herself and what's right for her own soul. Without that, the danger is, let's just take, for example, the wild woman. The wild woman is, in some ways, I think, like the most profound invitation for women onto the path of the soul. I don't think there is any coincidence whatsoever that so many women's journeys start with her one way or another. Of course, there is the classic book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves, by our friend Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who you would have heard me mention countless times before. That's really, whilst there are many different archetypes woven within that, there is a real sense that it's all kind of being journeyed through that portal. of the wild woman, La Loba, wolf woman. And I think she needs to be made conscious in order for us to have a wild relationship, a true relationship with any of the other archetypes. And so without her, we can easily be, again, unconsciously in one of those shadow poles, so one end or the other of the shadow pole of each of the other archetypes. And we likely will be, there's nothing wrong with that either. But the difference is whether we're in that work of making that conscious, whether we're in that work from a shamanic lens of really journeying back and reclaiming those parts of our soul that were lost, were fractured as we came into this life, perhaps even wounding from our ancestors from past lives, but certainly as we journey through this life. And so again, for me, if I'm guiding women into this work, that's what I'm looking for. There is already a need for that kind of maturity, and I mean true maturity, individuation that has to be there first for this not to be another way that a woman represses herself or exploits herself, which is so easily done. I've seen this so many times, and again, this is not me at all wanting to hate on other people's work or other people's journeys, but this is something I've seen a lot of the times in what you might call the polarity world, where people are working with the embodiment and expression of masculine and feminine energies, where this notion of particular aspects of the feminine, this particular archetypes that perhaps might be around surrender, end up being expressed without doing this work first, where it's just another attempt to get their needs met. And again, nothing wrong with that. That's ultimately what we're all doing all the time. And yet, again, if we work through the archetypes on the way to these, what we might call kind of higher archetypes with, huge amounts of collective shadow around, we are going to have a far better chance of living in a way that's actually in alignment for our soul. So that's what I'd really say, is that this is, again, there's almost as much that's going to come up in the way of working with this archetype in terms of fear and resistance, as there's also going to be this kind of touching into this sense of, this is so luscious, this is so juicy, this is so evocative, this is so allowing me to be in conscious relationship with some of my perhaps like more forbidden longings and fantasies. And so just recognize that is not to dismiss either. Both are important. If you're feeling that sense of longing to her, that's required. This is not at all a journey to enter from a logical place. If you feel that sense of calling to this archetype, really honor that. That's important. That provides the life force energy, that provides the pull. But again, also recognize there's going to be a lot to journey through in order to embody her. And again, that's not to say that that's wrong. That is the work. That is why she is so healing. That is why she takes us on this journey to union. I think I've been talking for a while. I've actually completely lost track of time, but I think I'm probably coming to the end of this episode. I'm just going to pause for a moment and just see if there's what else occurs to me. So there's a couple of things that feel really important for me to honor with the archetype of the Sacred Priestess. And I guess really why she represents that healing power that she does. She is a very rare archetype in this being completely given over to serving the divine. Typically, she's seen as being in service of the goddess, but of course, the service of the goddess is really service to the whole, service to the god, service to union. And so that's the first thing to recognize. this archetype isn't here to serve, I guess, sort of more mundane ends. She isn't here to just fulfill tasks that we typically see in the collective. She is here for that reason. She is here as a vessel for the divine. And that requires of her, and this is the languaging I've used with Rose Quest, this is a journey into complete receptivity. And of course, that's not something, and nor should we can just kind of choose and jump straight into. If we were to do that, it would be, again, really ignoring what's there. But that is the North Star. If, again, we are called to this, if we're called to this, that's the North Star we're being called towards, one of complete receptivity. When we look at it from a Kabbalah perspective on the Tree of Life, that priestess is both that vessel, that chalice in which for the divine to pour through her, but she's also pouring that out into the world. She is that expression of love and beauty into the world. But then there's some kind of paradox here too, in that you can see that, going back to that story I shared with you at the beginning, the sacred prostitute is in complete receptivity to the stranger. She is also completely open and receptive to him. And so all of these different expressions of her, all of these different relationships, the way that she relates to the goddess, the way she relates to the divine, the way she relates to herself, the way she relates to the stranger, is all one of receptivity. And again, that is something that we don't really tend to value much in our culture. Or if we do, it's something we project upon in ways that, again, aren't particularly conscious. So that really is, for me at least, when we're looking at the sacred prostitute and what she is evoking within us, calling us into, whether that's an embodiment of her personally or whether it's something that we desire to experience in the other, we want to embody the stranger in relationship with a sacred prostitute, or of course, as is always the case, these energies, one way or another, coexisting, being in union within us, she's calling us into that conscious relationship with receptivity. So for now, we need to leave the temple. And for those of you who are really feeling that sense of there's more here for me, I would again highly recommend the book I mentioned at the beginning, The Sacred Prostitute. This is a book I've recommended many times, and I think it's one, probably is different, but not unlike The Women Who Run with the Wolves, where I think some can find it quite dense, and it's very Jungian again in the languaging. It can feel that way. And then other times it can just really open up and really speak to us. And I think probably each time we return to it, we'll see and experience something else. But that is a book I wholeheartedly recommend, Sacred Prostitute by Nancy Qualls-Corbett. If you're feeling called perhaps not to go too deep with this archetype right now, but you're called to this way of working with the soul, following that soul path that you are uniquely being called to, then come join us at our Academy of the Soul Unio. Is all about union, but it's called Unio. And each month we set off on another monthly mythical quest together, but of course equally on our own. There's only some places we can only journey to alone, and the link for that is bemythical.com/unio. And of course, if you are a rare woman, and it really is a rare woman, this is certainly not something I would recommend to every woman, not at all. But if you are a rare woman who feels as though you might be ready to heed that call to the sacred prostitute, take a look at RoseQuest and we can arrange a conversation to see if indeed it is time. And the link for that is bemythical.com/RoseQuest. And as I said, part of the work that we'll be in is looking at how she's showing up for you uniquely. It doesn't matter the archetype that we're working with. One of the things that's so important for us to know is, yes, these are universal archetypes. They exist beyond us, but they also exist within us, and there will be a unique expression of each of those archetypes for us personally. And this can be illuminated in, a mind-blowing precision by the stars. So as part of that work, I will provide you with that astrological reading that's very specific to you and your embodiment, your journey with the Sacred Priestess, and that will provide that map that we'll be working with. If you are watching in the Facebook group and you aren't yet someone who has followed us, I'm getting confused now. It's been a while since I've done this. So if you aren't already following us on YouTube, if you enjoy listening or watching in this way, make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, which is Be Mythical, but I'm not quite sure the exact URL. And if you are watching or listening to this on one of the podcast platforms and you're not a member of our Facebook group, you may well want to come and join us there. And that's facebook.com/group/Be Mythical Community. That's everything for now. Thank you so much for joining me again, particularly given that this is not one of those most obvious and practical or easy archetypes for us to meet. She can be very confronting. So if you've chosen to join me, I appreciate and honor that so much. Thank you so much. All my love. Mwah. Goodbye. I very much hope you enjoyed watching that. And if you did and you're not already subscribed, then do hit that bell thingy and subscribe to automatically get each fresh new episode as it's released each week. If you'd like to find out more about the work we do at Be Mythical to guide and support old souls in this new world to live their own unique myth, do hop along to bemythical.com and you'll find out all the ways you can join us and go deeper with us on your own mythical journey. Lots of love for now. Mwah. See you again next week.